Welcome to Hong Kong, a place of economic prosperity and a perfect melting pot of the East and the West. This is what Hong Kong looked like during the handover, a monumental celebration to end British rule, which signaled Hong Kong's coming independence. This was Hong Kong 2 years ago, and this is Hong Kong now. But I want to know how we got here, from point A to point B. Starting out, Hong Kong fell under British occupation as a consequence of the First Opium War of 1841. But anyways, fast forward to 1984, after 142 years of British rule. Prime Minister of England, Lady Margaret Thatcher, met with the paramount Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping. They met in a secret conference where they would negotiate and lay out a path to the handover of Hong Kong. Both parties came to a mutual agreement to deem Hong Kong as a special administrative region, governed by the Hong Kong Chinese based off the system already in place, but without British rule. And thus was born Hong Kong's independence, and the special administrative region would see economic and social prosperity for years to come. But apparently, all good things must come to an end. We would see the first instance of this through the Umbrella Movement in 2014. These set of protests revolved around the NCP's decision to pre-screen candidates for the 2017 chief executive elections in Hong Kong, and it was one of the world's largest peaceful demonstrations at the time. In 2017, Carrie Lam was elected, who was a pre-screen candidate anyway, and someone who would bring great dismay to the city of Hong Kong. So all the efforts put into a peaceful manner of protest proved to be futile, and this political turmoil would just progressively get worse and worse. 2 years later, the extradition bill was proposed. On the accounts of Carrie Lam, this bill would allow Hong Kong to detain and transfer people wanted in countries and territories with which it has no formal extradition agreements with, including Taiwan and the Chinese mainland. The law would allow virtually anyone in the city to be picked up and detained in mainland China, a country in which judges must follow the orders of the Communist Party. And this is why Hong Kong now looks like this. I'm not satisfied though. I think it's important to get some ground level insight as to why this extradition bill is thought to be a good idea.
Extradition bill, it will be very critical and very crucial and very significant against some people from mainland China, but becoming Hong Kong residents right now. In past 40 years, thanks to the open and the development and open policy from Deng Xiaoping, and then accompanied with the economic development, the corruption in mainland China is very serious. That's true. And many people involved in corruption, many officers, the former officers of the central government, once they want to be safe, they will transfer their money, their assets to Hong Kong and get Hong Kong residence. With Hong Kong's unique, we call the special administrative area, then they can get sort of the punishments from the central government. However, if with the extradition bill, then they'll be judged, they'll be punished. So that's why there will be a very obvious and significant strength supporting the ordinary Hong Kong youth and even use them to do the protest. This is a very significant problem we have already paid attention.
Protests started with the march of 1 million people against the ill-conceived and ill-drafted extradition bill. The second weekend saw 2 million people march against the bill, and both were entirely peaceful. Things took a violent turn when protesters were attacked by suspected Triad members. A legislative council member was seen shaking hands with some of the attackers, so naturally, this incident turned public opinion even more against the establishment, with young protesters progressively becoming more and more aggressive. Things went off the rail when the Hong Kong Bar Association confirmed that more than 800 people had been arrested since the start of the protest, and many of them have been mistreated. Due to these reasons, the general youth have reached a boiling point, to the level where life without liberty is not good enough. And here lies the adopted mantra of liberty or death. To investigate how it reached this point of calamity, it's important to look at both sides of this issue.
So my name is Pete Sweeney. I live in Hong Kong. I'm the Asia Economics editor for Reuters Breaking Views, which is the financial commentary arm of Reuters. Everything I say in this conversation and others is my personal opinion, does not reflect the official position of Thomson Reuters. I'm an opinion columnist. So with that, the economy has been really rattled. The violence has put off a lot of people, is particularly dismayed mainland residents in Hong Kong, given there's been a strong element of kind of resentments against mainlanders as people amongst the local Cantonese-speaking Hong Kongers, as they were. So it's a big mess, and the government has done a spectacularly poor job, the local government, in terms of setting this off in the first place, and then managing it going forward. It has just been a staggering failure, and I'm sure Beijing is quite upset. For the central government, it's an embarrassment. It comes at a really bad time. Xi Jinping, the president of the People's Republic of China, is already engaged in a trade war with the United States, and is also, experiencing a wide degree of suspicion against his policies in places like Australia and Europe, even in neighbors, like Vietnam, India, so on and so forth. So he really didn't need a protest movement, a pro-democracy protest movement to blow up right in the middle of all that. And yet it did. It was unnecessary. And now neither he nor the Hong Kong chief executive, Carrie Lam, appear to have a good idea of how to extract themselves from it, how to placate the protesters and give them, and wind this whole thing down.
So how do we move forward then? Although the recent poll elections were heavily in favor of the pro-democracy parties in Hong Kong, not much can be said whether this is a big step forward or not.
Ever since that handover, there have been steps taken to infringe upon the rights of Hong Kong citizens. And a good point to bring up is the recent local elections that were a landslide victory for the Democrat candidates. 16 of 17 territories, I think, were won. And that is a huge success, but it doesn't dictate that it doesn't mean anything's going to change, because if you actually look at the way that LegCo works, you need a 2/3 majority to pass a bill onto China, which then needs a 2/3 majority. And then our chief executive can veto it. And the chief executive is elected by Beijing. So it's the illusion of a democracy. We can vote, but there's no real way that we can actually effectively change legislature in Hong Kong.
Although the hope for local democracy appears to be slipping away, the revolutionist idea lives on. However, there is one thing both sides can mutually agree on. The violence, it needs to stop. There's an underlying disaffection amongst the youth of Hong Kong which stem from a lack of job prospects and unaffordable housing. Maybe addressing some of these issues would help alleviate some of the pent-up rage that Hong Kongers feel.
Breaking Views came up with a misery index for Hong Kong where we tracked various factors alongside like the protest movements. And protests and unrest do not track housing prices. people aren't happy about how high the rents are, especially if you're young. But if you own housing here, you're okay because like that's part of your equity. So like, yeah, you could knock 20-30% off of housing prices and it would be easier for young people to buy. But then everybody who owns housing would have their wealth, less. So it's a double-edged sword there. What you need is affordable housing, like you mentioned. But you want it in such a way that it doesn't subtract from demand for buying. Keeping in mind the real estate lobby here has an outsized political influence, like in terms of choosing who the executive is. They have this kind of weighted industrial business sector votes, and the way that the government manages land policy and everything has all been very much in favor of property developers. But I mean, fundamentally, are people upset because house prices are high? I don't think so. The protesters have 5 demands. Everybody wants to say those aren't really demands. Like Beijing would very much like the demands to be something it can easily deal with. And like from its perspective, if you look at like the mainlanders, like everything ends up being about property. So they're seeing it through the lens of property. Okay, well here's the problem. It's impossible to overstate how important real estate speculation and investment is to the mainland economy. And they're looking at this through that prism. They don't want to hear that people want to vote and choose their leader. But if you look at the stats, what tracks the unrest, what is the closest correlation is this poll that shows trust in government. And Hong Kongers' trust in their government has been falling. And it's at record lows now. I mean, it's in terrible shape. And that is what the protest is about. They don't believe what Carrie Lam is saying. They didn't believe her predecessor. We've got a long string of like these chief executives ever since reunification. And they've all basically failed to win popularity, to win any sort of mandate. And so people just don't believe anything they say.
So essentially, there lies the problem itself. Hong Kongers, amongst the Goliathan figure of China, don't feel like their sense of identity, which is their liberty, is represented by the very core that is meant to represent them. And until there is some form of middle ground reached between the government and the Hong Kong people, and where they feel like their identity is represented, liberty or death shall live on.